Good day, everyone. Scooter coming to you live from the Granville Guitars World Headquarters here in lovely St. Petersburg, Florida. Today is August, what is it, the 22nd? Yeah, I think it's the 22nd of 2020. And I've been getting a lot of queries, questions, messages, inquiries, etc. About how this is going with the Granville Super Chief Amplifier. It's kind of at a standstill right now. I've had a lot of repairs to take care of, and I've been busy with that, and I'm still waiting on the faceplates to come from Modulus over in the UK. But I have gotten a little bit of work done here, and I thought I would show what's going on here. The first thing we're going to see is that I've temporarily installed all the potentiometers into this thing. Now, obviously, when the faceplates show up, those are going to have to come out in order to be installed, or at least the nuts will have to come off. Haven't done the input jacks yet. I'm going to save those for later. But I figured I'd go ahead and wire those. You'll notice there's some wires missing because they get interrupted in order to install the Metropolis zero loss effects loop that's also going into this amp. And let's see, there's a couple of things here. What else? I've added a bunch of wiring down here. The wire off to the filter supply from the rectifier down there, that red wire. Oh, something I got a question about. You'll notice these screws that are on my standoffs there that I made. They are nylon, and there's a reason for that, and it's kind of an embarrassing reason, frankly. When I made the board and did the holes for it, there's one, and it really doesn't matter because it's at a ground point, but there's one way up here, and this thing is again being kind of picky with its focusing. I have to do this slowly. You can see, well, maybe you can't unless it's going to focus. Heck with it. I'll zoom back out here. This screw right up here, that hole ended up too close to this point, this solder point right here. It's attached to ground anyway, but I like for grounds to be attached where I want them to be attached, not where they get accidentally attached. This was actually grounding this post right here, or this turret. So I ordered nylon screws so as not to connect to ground at that point. Picking nits, probably it definitely electrically wouldn't have made any difference, because like I said, these two turrets here are connected to ground, so it wouldn't have mattered. But I want my ground connections to be where I want them to be. Now you can also see, we'll look at it in a minute here, you can see my one of my ground strips right there. I like to minimize the number of places in the amplifier that the components acquire ground. It's not a true star ground situation, because there is more than one point. In a true star ground, every ground in the amp is connected to one point. I like to break it up into preamp, power amp, and main AC, and have three places where the majority of grounds are connected. Let's see here, what else? Oh, going over here, you can see that's your presence control, and that is the capacitor and resistor network that are involved with that control. And then bass, mid, treble, master, and pre. And like I said, not all of those connections on the potentiometers get used, but there's a couple of them that are empty that are going to get wired to later. Now, things that possibly got changed. Oh, yes. This turret board is one that's designed to be used for either 50s or 100 watts. And I made a couple of omission error kind of things when I was putting it together from the last video that needed to be changed. For instance, you'll see right there to the left of this 22 right here. These two 10Ks. On the 50 watt, there's a single 10K and a jumper right here. Okay. On the 100 watt, you need two 10Ks for that job. So I had to install that. Also, if you look closely at the last episode, this capacitor here, which is sometimes in these amps and sometimes not, the early 80s Marshalls again, which is what this is meant to emulate. Sometimes that little 47 PF is there and sometimes it isn't. I like it in there, so. But in the last video, it was not there because I was out of them. Also, you'll notice that the two grid stoppers that are typically installed here on the 50 watt are not here because you need 4 of them, and they're actually installed out onto the power tube sockets, which we're going to see here. Let me flip this around. Okay, let's see if I can get a decent view here. Let's go down here. There we go. Okay, those are the N2 power tube sockets, and you can see I've done the majority of the wiring for those. These are your screen grids. I like to use these ceramic ones, which are what you would find in a lot of vintage Marshalls. They're 5 watt 1Ks, and I think they have quite a bit to do with the sound of how these amps respond. But the grid stoppers that I was talking about are these right here. You end up with 4 individual ones rather than the 2. And I used carbon comps here for this job. I like the way they sound. I like what they do in that particular position. A lot of this stuff where I have a preference, I've had a chance to A/B different components in different amplifiers and developed a preference for one or the other. You know, you can go higher wattage, you can go metal oxide, there's a lot of ways you can do that, but that's what I like to do there. So, but yeah, all of my power tube sockets are wired up. You can see if you ease down here, and they're all wired in that same fashion. And then the preamp tube sockets, done all of that wiring as well. So the majority of that stuff is done. There's some input and output wires that aren't there yet because, like I said, there are those holes for the Metropolis zero loss effects loop, which just barely fits in that space next to this board. It's just gonna barely have enough room. So yeah, I've become a real big believer in that particular circuit, and I was never an effects loop guy. I didn't really like it much because I don't like what it did to the sound of the amplifier in the majority of cases. Well, George Metropolis came along and he changed all of that. He figured out a way to make it so that it doesn't interfere with the tone of the amp in the slightest, which is impressive as far as I'm concerned, very impressive. Let's zoom back out here, and not quite that much. This gives you another angle on the other side of the board here. See where everything's going. Now you'll see a turret right here. This one is going to be for the dropping resistor for the zero loss. I'm probably going to connect it here to the power supply. It depends. You kind of have to wait until everything's in the amplifier and wired up, and you get a quiescent voltage from the amplifier, and you have to pick carefully where you're going to supply power. But the dropping resistor is going to drop that voltage down to what the zero loss wants to see, which is right off the top of my head from the instructions, somewhere between 315 and 330 volts DC. Don't quote me on that as gospel. That's right off the top of my head, but it's in the low 300s in terms of voltage, what needs to be done. But that is what that extra turret is for. It's going to go from here to here, and then there's going to be a wire attaching there that will run off to the zero loss and power it. In my opinion, one of the reasons why the zero loss sounds so good and works so well is that it does operate at a high voltage. It operates at the same voltage as the other components in the amp operate, and thus it has the amp doesn't really even realize it's there. I've satisfied my own curiosity several times over the years about before and after on that. Does the amp sound the same before and after that thing? Here about a year ago, I made some high quality digital recordings of an amplifier, and I used a little looping pedal, the TC Electronics loop pedal, to play a guitar passage, so I could have the exact same thing played the exact same way at the exact same levels to compare the two digital tracks that I recorded. And with all the same settings and as close as possible. Obviously an amp gets moved around a bit, so things are going to change. There was negligible tonal difference. I couldn't detect any difference at all. They sounded exactly mirror image the same to me. So I satisfied my curiosity with that, and that's one of the reasons why you're going to hear me speak over and over again about Metropolis. Now here's a better view on this side of the ground strips that I was talking about. Let's see if I can zoom in some. I like to use these tag strips that you can see there for my grounding points. There's one there right near the input jacks. Your filtering for the preamp gets grounded there. There's a single 50-50 at 500 volt F&T capacitor under the board right here, and that's filtering for your preamp, and that gets grounded right here. That's that black wire. All of this stuff for the front of the amp is all grounded to this point. That's called a star ground, and that is to avoid ground loops inside the amplifier and thus induce hum and other crazy noises that you don't want. Now there's another strip slightly further down the amp here, located right between where the treble and mid-range potentiometers exist, and most of the things in the center of the board get grounded there. All of my grounds for my potentiometers go to this one or that one. I do not ground potentiometers to the backs of their housings. I don't run that wire across the back of the pots that you always see on Marshall amps. Is one better than the other? Who knows? But this is how I do it. Using the housing of a potentiometer to ground a high voltage circuit, not something I'm a fan of. In something like a guitar with passive high impedance pickups, putting out millivolts, not so much of an issue. But I feel like pot grounds are a place where interference can happen if you give it a chance. So I prefer to move those grounds off of the potentiometers themselves. Not better or worse, just the way I do it. And that kind of is the statement on a lot of things you're going to see in my amp and others' amps too. And someone else building an amp in this style, they can build it their way. This is how I build it my way. So that unfortunately is about the extent of what I got for today. Until these plates arrive, meaning the front plate and back plate with all of the bass, mid, treble, and nomenclature for each pot and jacks and switches and all that stuff. Until that shows up for the front and the back of the amplifier, there's a lot of things that install from the outside. Potentiometers install from the inside, so we can do those. And jacks too. I could have done the jacks, I just haven't done them yet. But everything else that's on here, the Metropolis, like I said, it installs from the inside, but I leave that till the last. You want the amp functioning and have all of its voltages settled in before you add the Metropolis to it. You want to make sure that it's all good to go. But you've got your voltage selector and actually the voltage selector is probably going to be here. Yeah. And your impedance selector for the output jacks. Those install from the outside, so that plate has to be installed. Also, the IEC outlet for the AC, the fuse holders, all of that stuff is installed from the outside. And up here, where all these wires are coming out, power switch, standby switch, those things are installed from the outside. So the plate has to be in place before any of that stuff can be installed. You can see all the extra holes they add to this chassis. I want to say it again, Modulus Amplification over there in the UK. I'm not sure what part of the UK. I think he might be in Scotland. I don't know. They have a wonderful website, Modulus Amplification. This chassis came from them. I love it. It's very, very well constructed. Everything's gone in it superbly. Haven't had to do a whole lot of adjustments to anything. I used CTS pots, and so these the holes for the potentiometers had to be enlarged slightly. But that's minor, and I'm equipped to do that. So anyway, again, Modulus Electronics over there in the UK. Seek them out. They have very fine products over there, not just chassis. They've got all kinds of Marshall-style parts and components, some of which are kind of hard to get in other places. So anyway, and you can see there's room for expansion in this chassis. I could have gone 4-hole input on the front. I'm not going to. I'm going to go 2-hole input on the front here. There's room for an additional preamp tube up here to add another gain stage. Say I want to do this 900 style sometime or something of that nature. Add a gain stage to it or something else I haven't thought of. It's there if I want it. So, yeah. And you can see down here, too, additionally, there are other holes I'm not going to use. There are two holes for old school on-off switches and standby switches and an old school pilot light. None of those are going to get used. I'm going to use the 800 style rocker switches. All right, that's all for today on the Granville Super Chief, not super cheap, the Granville Super Chief Amplifier. There'll be more to come sometime in the next week and a half, maybe 2. I'll be able to finish this hopefully before we go on vacation. That's coming up as well. So anyway, that's all I know on this for today. If you have any questions about anything we do here at Granville Guitars, seek us out on the web at www.granvilleguitars.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram and the blog over at WordPress, A View from the Granville Bench. That's all I know for today. Be good to one another.